The Vermont sun filtered softly through the chapel windows, casting warm golden light onto the polished wooden pews. Everything was in place. Ivory roses lined the aisle. Gentle piano music flowed through the air, and 62 guests waited, murmuring quietly, watching the large oak doors at the back of the room. Claire Whitmore stood just behind those doors, bouquet in hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Her wedding dress, handmade by her late mother's best friend, clung gently to her frame, simple lace, elegant, not flashy, just the way Claire liked things. Honest, quiet, real. Her heart thudded with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She wasn't the kind of woman who dreamed of fairy tale weddings. Claire, now 35, had seen enough of life to know that love wasn't about fireworks. It was about showing up, staying, listening. That's what she thought Jackson Reed understood. That's what she had believed until now. She glanced at her maid of honor, her cousin Holly, who gave her a warm, reassuring nod. Claire offered a grateful smile. A few deep breaths, just moments more. And she'd walk down that aisle to begin a new chapter. Then her phone buzzed. Claire almost didn't check it. But something in her chest, a sudden chill, a whisper of dread urged her to glance down. One message. From Jackson. Time 3:04 p.m., exactly 4 minutes past the ceremony's start time. I can't do this. I'm sorry. Please don't try to find me. Her hand slowly lowered, the phone slipping from her fingers and landing with a soft thud on the carpet. The room blurred around her. Holly's voice was calling her name, but it felt far away. A rising hum filled her ears, like a distant train approaching. Jackson was gone. Not late, not stuck in traffic. Gone. The next 30 minutes passed in a haze. Someone escorted the guests out of the chapel. A few awkward apologies. Some looks of pity. Others of whispered judgment. The photographer quietly packed his things. A little boy knocked over a flower arrangement. Claire sat alone in the dressing room, still in her gown, hands resting in her lap. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her eyes stared at the wall, blank, numb. Holly came in with a glass of water. Honey, I don't know what to say. Claire finally spoke, her voice flat but steady. There's nothing to say. It's done. He's a coward. He was my future, Claire replied. Or at least, I thought he was. A long silence followed, the weight of the moment settling like dust in the room. Then Claire stood up, slow but certain. I need to get out of this dress. That evening, Claire returned to her small apartment in downtown Boston. The city buzzed with its usual Saturday night energy, but her world had shrunk to the silence of a one-bedroom unit filled with leftover wedding decorations and untouched cake. She sat on the edge of her bed, picked up a throw pillow, and held it to her chest. That's when the tears came silent, hot, relentless. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the betrayal, the sense of being misled, abandoned, and the worst part, she never saw it coming. Jackson had been attentive, charming, supportive, even. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but he had said all the right things, promised forever, talked about kids, about retirement plans in Maine. He had made her feel seen, and now he was gone. No explanation, no closure, just silence. 3 days later, Claire's world shifted again. She was in the kitchen, barely touching her breakfast, when she glanced at the unopened box of pregnancy tests sitting by the sink, left there after a late-night conversation weeks before, when she and Jackson had been talking about trying soon. Her period was late, a full week. Hands shaking. She opened the box, mechanically going through the motions. She didn't expect anything. Her mind wasn't even fully present. 5 minutes later, the test turned positive. Claire stared at the result. Suddenly, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was echoing. She was pregnant, alone, abandoned, at 35. That night, she sat at her window with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the city lights flicker against the sky, the hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, and the faint whistle of wind passing through the cracks in her old windows. Her hand rested on her stomach, and for the first time since the wedding day, she whispered out loud, not to Jackson, not to herself, but to the life growing quietly within her. I don't know what we're going to do, but I promise you this, I won't leave you. The words surprised her, not because she didn't mean them. She did, but because they reminded her of who she really was. Claire Whitmore wasn't weak. She had bent, yes, been broken, but not shattered. Not yet. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding that never was. Boston in late October had turned crisp and gray. The wind carried a bite now, and the sidewalks glistened with fallen leaves and puddles that never quite dried. Claire Whitmore walked home from the grocery store, a canvas tote in one hand, a paper bag of saltine crackers in the other. She had barely made it to the corner of Boylston Street before the nausea kicked in again. The first trimester was unforgiving. She paused near a rusted bench, breathing through her nose, focusing on a nearby pigeon pecking at crumbs. Somehow, watching something so ordinary steadied her. Claire had told no one about the pregnancy, not Holly, not her co-workers at the art center, certainly not Jackson. She'd been living in a strange in-between, not quite ready to face the world, not yet able to hide from it. At work, she taught her evening watercolor classes with a practiced smile. She'd perfected the art of seeming fine. But in the quiet hours at home, the mask slipped. She couldn't look at her wedding dress, still zipped in a garment bag behind her bedroom door. Her voicemail was still full of curious calls from guests, unanswered texts from Jackson's sister, and one email from a woman named Danielle, whose subject line read, "I thought you should know." Claire never opened it. Some truths, she thought, reveal themselves when they're ready. Or maybe she just didn't want one more piece of her heart to break. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the heat pipes clanged in protest, Claire sat on the floor of her living room, sorting through a memory box. Inside were photos of her parents, both now gone. Her mother's old locket, a pressed four-leaf clover from when she was 10. Ticket stubs from a jazz concert she went to with Jackson during their first month together. She held the ticket between her fingers. They had danced that night in the back of the theater, barefoot on the velvet carpet, long after the band had stopped playing. Jackson had whispered, "You're my always." And for a moment, she'd believed in things like fate and forever. Claire blinked hard and put the ticket in the trash. She was done collecting ghosts, but grief isn't something you walk away from in a single decision. It lingers. It settles in the bones. There were nights Claire would find herself curled on the couch with the TV on mute, one hand cradling her growing belly, the other tracing invisible patterns on the fabric of her sweater, searching for comfort in the rhythm. What hurt the most wasn't being alone. It was the sense that her story had been rewritten without her consent. She was no longer the hopeful bride-to-be, the teacher known for painting wildflowers on canvas and humming in the halls. Now, she was that woman, the one left at the altar, the one some pitied, the one others whispered about in elevators and staff lounges. It was subtle, but it was there, the way some people looked at her with gentle condescension, as if she'd broken something she couldn't fix, as if heartbreak was contagious. It wasn't until a rainy Thursday in mid-November that she finally confided in someone. Holly had invited her over for soup. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, the kind of smell that wrapped itself around your shoulders like an old quilt. They sat on the couch with mismatched mugs and warm bread in their laps. Claire hesitated, staring into her bowl for a long time before finally whispering, "I'm pregnant." Holly blinked, then slowly set her mug down. "Say that again, I'm pregnant." "Hall, I'm almost 2 months along." Silence stretched between them. Not heavy, just long enough for truth to land. Then Holly reached over and took Claire's hand. "Well, that explains the crackers and ginger tea. I was starting to think you'd joined a monastery." Claire let out a soft laugh, surprised by the tears that followed. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You're doing what you always do," Holly said. "You're surviving. You're carrying life while healing from loss. That's a kind of strength most people don't even understand." Claire nodded, eyes stinging. "I haven't told him." "You don't owe him anything?" "Claire, not after what he did." "I know," she whispered. "But part of me wonders if Ella will one day ask why I kept it from him, why I made that choice alone." Ella Claire blinked. That's what I think I'll name her." Later that night, after Holly had gone to bed, Claire stepped out into the small backyard garden, wrapped in a wool coat, her scarf pulled up to her chin. The air was damp, the kind that made every breath feel like a secret kept close. She looked up at the cloud-thick sky and murmured to herself, "I don't have all the answers, but I have you." And that's enough for now. The next morning, she packed 2 bags, one with essentials, the other with keepsakes. She took a final look around her apartment, the place that held pieces of her old life, now too small for who she was becoming. She slipped her phone into airplane mode and deleted Jackson's number. Claire wasn't running away. She was running toward something, though she didn't yet know what. Only that it would be far from the city. Somewhere quieter, where healing didn't feel like performance. And maybe, just maybe, where new roots could grow. Claire Whitmore had always been a woman of quiet decisions. She didn't shout her pain. She didn't parade her joy. So when she left Boston, she told no one except Holly, not because she wanted to disappear, but because she needed to breathe. The drive from Boston to northern Vermont took just under 4 hours. She took back roads for most of it, following winding highways lined with flaming orange and burgundy trees. Autumn was holding on tightly before the first snow would arrive. Her destination was a small farmhouse she had inherited from her late aunt, a place she hadn't visited in nearly 8 years. It sat at the edge of Willow Creek, a town with more trees than traffic lights, and where time moved slower more gently. Claire arrived just after sunset. The house greeted her like an old friend, chipped paint, creaky porch, windows fogged with age. She stood at the edge of the gravel drive for a long moment, one hand resting on her belly, the other gripping the car door for balance. Inside, the air was cool and still. Dust clung to the windowsills. A few cobwebs stretched confidently across the corners of the ceiling. But the bones of the place were strong, and somehow that gave her comfort. She moved through each room slowly, not inspecting, just remembering. The soft creak of the stairs, the kitchen with the oversized sink where her aunt used to wash vegetables from the garden, the reading nook by the fireplace that once held her during summer visits. Now, it would hold her again, in a different kind of season. The first few days were quiet. Claire lit candles in the evenings and listened to the wood settling as the temperatures dropped. She cooked simple meals: eggs, toast, vegetable soup, and spent long mornings walking along the fence line that bordered her property. It was strange to feel so much stillness after months of emotional storm. There were no questions here, no whispers, no awkward glances, just birdsong, the rustle of leaves, and the faint scent of pine carried by the breeze. Each night, she wrote letters in a notebook she didn't intend to send. Letters to Ella. Thoughts scribbled in soft pencil, sometimes hopeful, sometimes terrified. Today I sat by the orchard and felt you kick for the first time. You're growing stronger, little one. And maybe I am, too. On the fourth morning, Claire wandered into town. Willow Creek was a 2-lane place with a diner, a hardware store, a small clinic, and one old general store that smelled like coffee and soil. The kind of town where people waved, even if they didn't know you. She bought a few essentials: flour, oats, a second-hand teapot, and made polite conversation with the woman behind the counter. When asked where she was from, she simply said, "Boston," and left it at that. On her way out, she noticed a handwritten sign pinned to the community board: local help needed for fall orchard cleanup. Ask for Caleb at Monroe Farm. That afternoon, she followed a gravel road that led to the edge of a wide apple orchard. Trees stretched across rolling hills like rows of quiet soldiers, their leaves curling inward, preparing for winter. Claire parked near a faded red barn and stepped out. The air smelled like fallen fruit and damp earth. She almost turned around when she saw him. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing worn boots and a navy flannel, stood near a wooden crate, tossing apples into a barrel. His hair was a little overgrown, silver threading through the dark brown. He moved with the kind of quiet that comes from being alone often and being fine with it. He looked up as she approached, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was calm, deep, unhurried. "Hi," Claire replied. "I saw the sign in town about the orchard help." He studied her for a second, not rudely, just the way people do when they're trying to understand something unspoken. "You're not from around here," he said gently. "No, just moved in a few days ago. My aunt used to live up on Maple Hollow Road." "Whitmore place?" he asked. Claire nodded. "That's the one?" "I'm Caleb Monroe," he said, offering his hand. "This is my land." She shook it. His hand was warm, calloused, real. Claire. They spent the next hour walking the edge of the orchard. Caleb explained the layout, the work ahead, pruning, sorting, clearing out the lower field. Claire listened more than she spoke, her boots crunching over fallen apples, her thoughts occasionally drifting to the flutter of movement in her belly. "You sure you're up for it?" he asked once, glancing at her stomach. Claire smiled. "I won't be climbing trees, if that's what you're worried about." Caleb gave a soft chuckle. "Fair enough." As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the fields, Claire turned back toward her car. Caleb walked with her. "Why'd you come out here?" he asked. It wasn't pushy, more like a neighbor asking about the weather. Claire paused. "I needed quiet. Life got loud." Caleb nodded, like he understood that more than he let on. "Well," he said, "quiet's something we've got plenty of around here." Claire drove home with the windows cracked slightly, the scent of apple and earth following her like a memory she didn't know she'd needed. And that night, under thick blankets and candlelight, she wrote again to Ella. "Today, I met someone kind, not loud, not charming, just steady. I don't know why that mattered, but it did." The following Monday, Claire Whitmore returned to the orchard. She wore her late aunt's old flannel jacket, a bit oversized, sleeves rolled and thick boots that had seen better winters. Vermont mornings had begun their slow shift into frost, and the crisp air made her breath visible in small, delicate clouds. Caleb Monroe greeted her near the edge of the barn, where steam rose from 2 mugs of coffee balanced on the hood of an old pickup truck. One of them was waiting for her. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said, offering her the cup. "I'm full of surprises," Claire replied, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. They began the morning sorting apples into barrels. Some were for cider, some for baking, and others, the bruised, imperfect ones, would be donated or turned into animal feed. Caleb moved with quiet efficiency, his hands sure, his gestures economical. Claire watched him out of the corner of her eye. He wasn't like men she'd known in Boston. He didn't fill silence with noise. He didn't try to impress her with big words or bold charm. He just showed up. Fully. Gently. It was disarming. They fell into a rhythm, a kind of unspoken duet that made the hours pass, like pages turning. "You grew up here?" she asked once, during a break beneath the tall ash trees. "Not quite," he said, brushing sawdust off his pants. "Grew up in Albany. Moved here 10 years ago." "What brought you?" He paused, looked toward the hills. "My wife passed," he said simply. "Cancer. We'd always talked about starting a small farm. After she was gone, I just didn't want to stay where everything reminded me of losing her. So I came here. Built something quieter." Claire didn't respond right away. Her fingers gripped the edges of the apple crate. "I'm sorry," she finally said. Caleb nodded, accepting it like someone who had heard those words often, but never grew tired of their intention. Over the next few weeks, Claire came to the orchard most mornings. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. She helped with sorting, raking, even labeling jars of homemade cider. Caleb showed her how to tie back the trees for winter and which tools to use without bruising the fruit. One morning, he brought her a pair of thick gloves and said, "You're part of the crew now. I'm the only crew," she quipped. He smiled. "Exactly." But it wasn't just about the work. It was the conversations, the small ones that snuck in between the tasks. About music, he liked blues. She liked indie folk. About food, she missed Boston bagels. He made a mean venison stew. About books, they both reread To Kill a Mockingbird every few years. For different reasons. They didn't talk about Jackson or the baby. Not yet. But Claire found herself thinking about it more. Not the pain, but the possibility. There was a moment, a quiet one, when Caleb walked past her to grab another basket. He brushed close, and she caught the scent of pine and earth, soap and wind. It reminded her of safety, of stillness. And she realized, with a strange mix of warmth and fear, that she felt more seen in that 1 second than she had in entire years with Jackson. One Thursday morning, it began to snow. Not heavy, just a dusting, soft as powdered sugar. The orchard looked like a postcard. Claire stood outside the barn, her hands wrapped around a cup of cider, watching the flakes land in her hair. "You okay?" Caleb asked from behind her. She turned. "Yeah, just letting it sink in. What that I'm not who I was a month ago." He nodded slowly. "That's not a bad thing. No, just strange. I thought I'd be broken, but I feel more whole out here than I did back in the city." He studied her. Maybe being broken is what opens us up to something better. Claire didn't answer right away, but her eyes shimmered with quiet agreement. Later that afternoon, as they locked up the barn, Claire handed Caleb a jar of her homemade fig jam, one of the few things she'd brought from Boston. "It's not much," she said, "but thank you for not asking too many questions." Caleb accepted it with a soft chuckle. Sometimes silence says more than questions ever could. That night, Claire lit a fire in her small living room and curled under an old quilt. Ella kicked gently, not urgent, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. She placed a hand over her belly and whispered, "I think we're going to be okay." And for the first time, she truly believed it. By early December, Willow Creek had surrendered itself to winter. Snow sat gently on the barn roof, and the orchard trees stood bare and solemn, like quiet witnesses to the changing seasons. Claire Whitmore began to recognize the rhythm of rural life, slower, softer, but somehow fuller. Each morning, she made tea before the sun rose. She fed the birds outside her kitchen window, keeping a small journal of which species visited chickadees, cardinals, once even a cedar waxwing. The days were quiet, but never empty, and Caleb Monroe had quietly become part of that rhythm. Some mornings, he'd knock on her door with a fresh loaf of bread or leftover soup. Other times, he'd leave a bundle of firewood on her porch without saying a word. It wasn't grand. It wasn't romantic. But it felt like something being built, brick by brick, gesture by gesture without either of them naming it. One morning, as they were tying down tarps over equipment near the barn, Claire paused to catch her breath. The cold made her lungs ache slightly, and her lower back tensed more quickly these days. "You need to slow down," Caleb said gently, stepping beside her. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she replied, half smiling. "I know, but you don't always have to prove how strong you are." The words hit her more deeply than she expected. Claire turned away, pretending to adjust the rope. That evening, she stood in her kitchen, stirring a pot of butternut squash soup, when the memory surfaced uninvited, but insistent. Jackson's hand on hers at the ultrasound appointment. The way he'd kissed her forehead and said, You're going to be the best mom. And then, the text. I can't do this. Please don't try to find me. Claire pressed a hand to her belly and whispered, You deserved better. And so did she. The next day, a small snowstorm swept through Willow Creek. The power flickered, then failed just after dusk. Claire lit candles, pulled on thick socks, and huddled by the fireplace with a wool blanket. The silence of a powerless house at night was unlike any other almost holy. Around 8 p.m., there was a knock at the door. It was Caleb, dusted in snow, holding a thermos and a flashlight. Thought you might need this, he said. She stepped aside and let him in. They sat by the fire, sharing the thermos hot cider spiced with cinnamon and something slightly sweet. Claire hadn't felt so warm in weeks. After a few minutes of silence, she turned to him and said softly, You asked once why I came here. I think I'm finally ready to tell you. Caleb didn't speak, just waited. Claire stared into the fire, watching the logs shift and pop. I was left at the altar, she said, 3 months ago. Dress on, guests seated, music playing. He just didn't show. Caleb's jaw tightened subtly, but he said nothing. I thought I knew him. Jackson. He said all the right things. Talked about family. Kids. Ella wasn't planned, but I wasn't scared. I thought we'd be okay. Ella, he asked quietly. Claire nodded, smiling gently. That's her name. I haven't told anyone else that, not even Holly. Caleb leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. You must have been carrying a lot alone. Claire looked at him, her eyes glassy. I still am, most days. You don't have to. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was safe, almost protective. They talked into the night, about grief, about guilt, about how love can betray you and still somehow leave room for hope. Claire shared stories about her parents, her students back in Boston, her fear of being judged for being left, for becoming a mother alone. Caleb, in turn, spoke about his late wife. Anna, how she used to hum while folding laundry, how she hated cilantro, how the last year of her life taught him that love sometimes means just sitting quietly beside someone while they fall apart. No fixing, just presence. Eventually, the fire burned low. Claire stood, stretching carefully, and said, You should head back before the snow buries your truck. Caleb nodded, but paused near the door. I meant it, he said. You don't have to carry everything on your own. Claire looked at him. I'm not used to someone saying that without expecting something in return. I'm not used to anyone listening without running away. Their eyes met, and for a moment, it was all there. The ache, the respect, the unspoken want. But neither crossed the space between them. Not yet. After Caleb left, Claire stood for a long time at the window, watching his headlights disappear down the snowy road. Ella kicked softly, and Claire whispered, I think we're going to be okay, but maybe not just because I'm strong. Maybe because I'm not alone anymore. The snow hadn't melted for days. Claire Whitmore moved slower now, her belly rounding into the final months. The doctor at the Willow Creek Clinic said everything looked healthy. Baby girl was growing strong. Her kicks came often, usually at night, like little reminders that life was moving forward whether Claire was ready or not. And most days, she was ready, or close enough. She had carved out a quiet life. Morning walks through the orchard, afternoons sorting books in the little local library she'd started volunteering at. Evenings spent reading or talking with Caleb Monroe by the fire. They didn't label what they had, but it was steady, safe, kind. Which is why the sound of a knock at the front door, sharp, sudden, unfamiliar, made every hair on Claire's arm stand up. It was early afternoon. Snow flurries danced past the kitchen window. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door, expecting the postman or a neighbor needing something. Instead, she saw him, Jackson Reed, standing on her porch like he hadn't disappeared 4 months ago, like he hadn't broken her. He looked thinner, still sharp in a tailored coat, but paler, uneasy. "Claire?" he said, voice tight. "Hi." She didn't speak, couldn't. Her body went cold. I heard you left Boston." He continued. "I wasn't sure where. But your cousin Holly eventually told me." Claire's stomach twisted. "You showed up here, I needed to talk to you." She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't care. "You don't get to show up here," she said, quietly but firmly. I know I hurt you. That's not the word for what you did." He swallowed hard, eyes darting to her rounded stomach. "You're how far along?" Claire didn't answer. Jackson nodded slowly. "It's mine, isn't it?" Her hands clenched into fists inside her coat pockets. "Don't say that, like you're part of this. I am part of this. Claire." "No," she said, voice breaking. "You were part of the lie, the promise. The day I stood in a room full of people with no explanation, no message except for a coward's text. I panicked. He whispered, I wasn't ready, and you thought I was." He didn't respond. They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind stirring between them like a third presence. Finally, Jackson said, "I've been seeing a therapist. I'm working on myself. But I want to be in her life." Claire stared at him. The audacity of it. The timing. The timing. "She's not your redemption arc," she said through clenched teeth. "I'm not asking to take over. I just give me a chance to be there." As her father. Claire took a step back. "You don't get to ask for that. You forfeited that right the moment you walked away. She's not a concept. She's not a second chance. She's a child. I have rights. You have nothing." She snapped. No presence, no memories, no name whispered to her at night. You gave all of that up. The front door opened behind her. Caleb Monroe stepped outside, his face unreadable. He looked at Claire, then at Jackson. "Everything okay?" he asked calmly. Claire didn't answer immediately. Jackson raised his eyebrows. "And who's this someone who stayed?" Claire said. Jackson scoffed. "You moved on fast. Don't," she warned, her voice low. Caleb stepped beside her, but didn't touch her. He didn't try to protect or interfere. He was simply there. Jackson looked between them and shook his head. "I'll talk to my lawyer," he said. "If you're not going to let me be part of her life willingly, then I'll go through the court." He turned and walked down the steps, boots crunching on packed snow. Claire didn't watch him leave. She just stared at the bare trees in the distance, frozen and unyielding. Inside, she sat on the edge of the couch, hands trembling. Caleb brought her tea, kneeling in front of her. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked gently. "Give you space." She shook her head. "I don't want space. I want truth. I want quiet. I want to not feel like I'm back at the start. You're not, he said. You've already come too far. Claire looked at him, tears rising now. He can take her. He can file something and take her. No. Claire, he can try. But you're not alone. Not anymore. That night, she called Holly. Her cousin picked up on the second ring. I'm so sorry, Holly said before Claire could speak. He showed up at my office. I didn't know what to say. I didn't mean to give him your address. Claire, he seemed different. Claire didn't get angry, just tired. It's okay. You're not the one who hurt me. Are you? Are you going to fight it? I have to. The next week was a blur of paperwork, consultations, and emotional whiplash. A family attorney in Montpellier agreed to represent Claire. She gathered records, messages, even the invitation list from the wedding. What hurt most was reading through old emails, seeing his words, promises, plans, fantasies that now felt like fiction. But she also found something else, strength. The kind of strength that didn't roar, it didn't scream. It stood up quietly, even with shaking knees, and said, not this time. One night, Caleb came over to find Claire, hunched at the table, surrounded by papers. He didn't ask questions, just pulled out a chair and helped her sort through it. At one point, she said, what if he wins? What if the court sees him as this changed man and thinks a child needs her father, no matter what? Caleb looked at her, his eyes steady. Then we tell the truth, and we trust the court to hear it. Claire nodded slowly. You keep saying we, because that's what it is. He said, not just you. Later that night, Claire wrote in her notebook to Ella. He came back, the man who left us. But this time, I didn't freeze. I stood. And maybe that's what being a mother is. Not being perfect, but being present, even when it hurts. The courthouse in Montpellier was quiet that morning. Snow fell in slow spirals outside the tall windows, and the old radiators hissed gently along the wooden-paneled walls. Claire Whitmore sat on a bench in the hallway, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a folder clutched against her belly. She was 7.5 months pregnant, her coat no longer zipping closed. She hadn't slept much. Neither had Caleb Monroe, who sat beside her, one hand on his knee, the other holding a small thermos of chamomile tea he'd made at 5 a.m. Inside the courtroom, the clerk called for case 2025 PR Reed versus Whitmore. Claire inhaled deeply. It's just truth, Caleb whispered. You've already lived it. Now you speak it. She nodded, then stood. The courtroom was modest, with oak pews and a single judge's bench raised slightly above eye level. Family court wasn't like on television. There was no shouting, no drama, just facts, testimonies, and a thin current of tension running under every spoken word. Jackson Reed sat across the aisle, beside his attorney. He looked sharp, polished, contrite. Claire couldn't help but notice the tailored suit, the fresh haircut, the carefully folded pocket square. It wasn't him, not really. It was a performance. The judge, a woman in her early 60s, with kind eyes but a firm voice, addressed the room. We're here today to determine the preliminary custody rights regarding the unborn child of Ms. Claire Whitmore and Mr. Jackson Reed. And with that, it began. Jackson spoke first. His lawyer led him through a gentle, well-rehearsed monologue. He had been overwhelmed. He had left out of fear. He had sought therapy. He had returned to take responsibility. He had never stopped caring. Claire sat still, face unreadable. But inside, every sentence felt like a stone placed carefully on a grave. Then it was her turn. Claire took the stand slowly, adjusted the microphone, looked at no one but the judge. "I'm not here to punish Jackson," she began, "and I'm not here to erase him. I'm here because I have to protect my daughter." She paused, gathering herself. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was alone. I had been abandoned. There was no goodbye, no conversation, just a text. No effort to reach out until months later after I'd moved, rebuilt, and was already preparing to raise this child on my own." She glanced toward Jackson briefly. Responsibility isn't about timing. It's about presence, about being there when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Claire's voice broke slightly, but she didn't stop. "I've read his statements. I've heard what he's rehearsed, but I've also lived what he ran from. And I believe a parent is someone who shows up before the applause." Silence followed. The judge looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. Next." The judge allowed a character witness. Claire's attorney called Caleb Monroe. He stood tall, yet quiet, as he made his way to the front. "Mr. Monroe," the attorney began. "How long have you known Ms. Whitmore?" "About 3 months," Caleb replied. "And in that time, what have you observed regarding her preparation for motherhood?" Caleb looked at Claire, then back at the attorney. "She's gentle, but fierce when it comes to this child. She walks every morning, even when it's snowing. She reads parenting books like they're the Bible. She talks to her daughter before bed. She's made a home out of loss, and I've never seen anyone fight that quietly and that hard for a life not yet born." Claire felt tears press behind her eyes. "And you," the attorney asked, "what is your relationship to Ms. Whitmore?" "I'm not her husband. I'm not her boyfriend. I'm not here to replace anyone." He turned, looking directly at Jackson. "But I'm here. I've been here. And if Claire lets me, I'll keep being here. Because that's what a child needs, not perfection, not a name on paper, but someone who doesn't disappear." When court recessed for deliberation, Claire stepped outside into the cold. Caleb followed quietly, offering her gloves she'd forgotten in the courtroom. She slipped them on slowly. "I don't know what will happen," she said softly. "You already did the hardest part," he replied. "You stood up." Claire looked at him, eyes heavy. What if he gets visitation? What if he forces himself into her life just to satisfy his guilt? Then you'll still be her mother, and she'll see the difference. Kids know the truth when they're loved enough to recognize it. An hour later, the judge returned with a ruling. Jackson Reed would have no legal custody of Ella until she was born, and a formal petition could be filed. He would have no right to contact Claire directly without legal mediation. His actions leading up to and following the abandonment were deeply concerning and required further psychological evaluation before any consideration of parental involvement. Claire exhaled slowly. Relief didn't come in a rush. It settled gradually, like warmth returning to frostbitten skin. As she gathered her things, Jackson approached hesitantly, awkwardly. "I meant what I said," he murmured. Claire looked at him, not with anger, but with something clearer. "I did too," she replied. "And I meant it when I walked into that courtroom alone." That night, back in her farmhouse, Claire sat by the fire. She took her journal and wrote to Ella, "You were almost a battlefield today, but you're not. You're a beginning, and beginnings deserve peace." She closed the book, placed it on the windowsill, and looked out into the snowy orchard where the trees stood still waiting, as always, for spring. The snow had begun to melt, slowly and shyly, as if unsure it was time to go. March in Willow Creek was unpredictable bright one day, brooding the next, but the orchard had started to shift. Buds clung to branches. Earth softened beneath the melting frost. And in her farmhouse kitchen, Claire Whitmore washed tiny onesies in warm water scented with lavender. She folded them carefully, tucking each piece into a woven basket beside the crib. Every button, every thread felt like a promise. Ella was coming soon, and for the first time in her life, Claire felt like a world was arriving, not falling apart. Caleb Monroe had become a near constant in her days. They didn't talk about them much, didn't define what was growing between them, but it was there, woven into the quiet dinners, the way he'd reach for her hand without thinking, or how she would make an extra cup of tea even when he hadn't said he was stopping by. One Friday afternoon, he knocked on her door, holding a small brown envelope. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" He smiled. "Open it." Inside was a hand-drawn map in his messy but endearing handwriting, marked with an X. "What is this? Some kind of scavenger hunt?" "Something like that," Caleb said. "Dress warm. I'll drive." They drove for 20 minutes, through winding hills and into a clearing Claire hadn't seen before. The air was still crisp, but the sun was shining, a rare gift that time of year. At the edge of the field stood a small greenhouse, newly built. Claire looked at it, confused. "What is this?" Caleb turned toward her. "It's yours. Or ours." "I wasn't sure what to get someone who already carries the whole world inside her." She blinked. "You built this, with help. Took a few weekends. I know you love to grow things. Paint them. Touch them. I thought maybe, when Ella's here, you'd want to keep creating." Claire stepped inside the greenhouse. It smelled like soil and pine. On one side, shelves held small pots with herbs already sprouting. On the other, a wooden chair and a sketchbook sat by the window. She turned to find Caleb standing behind her, quieter now. "I didn't do this to impress you," he said. "I just wanted to build something that could hold beauty again." Claire felt the tears before they fell, not the kind born from pain, but from being seen. Then Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring box. Her breath caught. He opened it. No diamonds, no flash, just a thin band of gold, etched with two small initials, C+E. "I don't want to rescue you," he said softly, "and I don't need saving, but I'd walk beside you all the way, if you let me." Claire stared at the ring. Her heart raced, not from joy, not from fear, from the weight of being asked again to trust. She stepped back. "Caleb?" He nodded slowly, gently closing the box. "It's okay. No, it's not that I don't love you. I think I do. I know I do. But I haven't finished healing yet. And I can't say yes to something beautiful if there's still pieces of me afraid it'll break." Caleb didn't flinch. "Then don't say yes yet. Just hold it." He handed her the closed box. "I can wait," he said. "For the day your heart feels safe enough to open both the door and the window." Claire placed her hand over the box. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she placed the ring box on her nightstand, not hidden away, not forgotten, just waiting. In her notebook to Ella, she wrote, "Someone asked me to marry him today. Not because I'm carrying you, not because I'm broken, but because he sees us. I said not yet, but maybe not yet is still a kind of yes." The next few days moved quietly. Claire painted again, not commissions or gifts, but for herself. She sketched the greenhouse, the curve of her belly, a set of tiny fingers she hadn't met yet. Caleb still came by, still brought firewood and late-night blueberry muffins. He didn't mention the proposal, and that silence, too, was love. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Caleb turned to her. "You ever think about leaving this town again?" Claire sipped her tea. "Not in a while." Why? Because for the first time, the quiet isn't lonely. It's full. He smiled, and though he didn't say it, Claire knew he understood. Claire Whitmore stood by the window of the nursery, one hand resting lightly on her belly, the other cradling a warm mug of ginger tea. Outside, the orchard stirred under a blanket of early spring fog, branches slick with dew. The snow had finally melted. Life was beginning again, quiet and slow. Ella kicked gently beneath her ribs. "I'm here," Claire whispered, more to herself than to the child. "We're still here." The days after Caleb's proposal had been filled with silence, not the kind that meant distance, but the kind that made room for reflection. He hadn't asked again. He didn't need to. His love wasn't in the ring. It was in the way he filled her propane tank without being asked. How he left her favorite bread on the porch when she'd been too tired to bake. How he listened, really listened when she spoke, even about things she was still untangling herself from. But still, the question hung in the air, like the scent of lilac after a storm. Was she ready? That question followed her everywhere. It lingered in the orchard, where the trees now budded with new life. It drifted into her dreams, where Jackson's face sometimes reappeared, not cruel, but confusing. And it echoed in her own heart. In the quietest place where doubt and hope tangled like roots in deep soil. One afternoon, she sat with Holly on a bench overlooking the frozen edge of Willow Lake. They shared a thermos of chamomile and a silence that only years of closeness could hold. "You look clearer," Holly said softly. Claire exhaled. "I feel like I've been holding my breath since last fall. Since the church. Since he didn't show up." Holly reached out and took her hand. "I remember you that day. You stood there like a statue, but your eyes were still trying to make sense of it. I've never wanted to scream for someone the way I did for you." Claire smiled, tears stinging. "I didn't cry that day. Not until I was home and barefoot in my kitchen. I dropped a glass, and that's when I lost it." Holly squeezed her fingers. Grief sneaks out through the smallest cracks. That evening, Claire took out the ring box Caleb had given her. She placed it on the table, untouched since the day at the greenhouse. She stared at it for a long time, then opened it not to wear the ring, but to hold it, to understand what it meant beyond romance. It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a replacement. It was a reminder that love, when honest, didn't arrive with a demand. It offered a place to rest. But before she could rest in anyone else's arms, she had to sit with herself. She spent the next few days doing just that. She reread old journals from college, letters from her mother, the email from Danielle, the one she'd ignored for months after the wedding now opened. It was an apology, a confession of an affair, the missing puzzle piece. And it no longer hurt the way she thought it would. It just confirmed what she had already known in her bones. Jackson hadn't left because he was scared. He left because he never intended to stay. On the 5th day, Claire packed a small overnight bag, left a note for Caleb, and drove 2 hours to the coast, a quiet inn near Rockport, Massachusetts, where she'd once gone with her mother years ago. She didn't go to run away. She went to remember who she was when no one needed her, wanted her, or left her. She walked along the beach, ate dinner alone, watched the tide roll in and out like breath, and in the quiet of a room filled with nothing but salt air and the sound of waves, she whispered aloud, "I forgive you, Claire," and she meant it. When she returned home, spring had fully arrived. The tulips near the porch had bloomed. The crib had been assembled. Caleb had left her a note. "Figured you'd want the hard part done." Claire smiled. She took a deep breath, then picked up her phone. That evening, Caleb arrived at her door. She opened it before he knocked. "You're back," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. "I needed time." "I know." They stood in silence, the kind that no longer scared her. Then Claire took his hand and placed the ring box into it. "I still don't have an answer," she said, "but I've chosen something. Someone." Caleb looked at her gently. "Who?" She smiled, a little tremble in her voice. "Me." He didn't look disappointed. He looked proud. "Good," he said softly. "That's where everything else begins." That night, Claire wrote to Ella again. "Today, I didn't say yes to a ring. I said yes to myself. And when you're old enough to ask why, I'll tell you this. Because the most important promise I could ever make before any vows or papers was to be the kind of woman I'd want you to become. Ella Monroe." Whitmore was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. The kind of rain that smelled like turned soil and clean beginnings. The kind of morning where birds still sang, undeterred by the gray sky. And though the labor had been long, and Claire had been exhausted down to her bones, the moment she heard her daughter cry clear, strong, utterly alive, everything else softened. She held her against her chest, skin to skin, and whispered, "We made it." Caleb sat beside the hospital bed, his hand gently wrapped around hers, his forehead resting against the back of her wrist. He didn't speak, and Claire didn't need him to. His presence was enough. It always had been. 3 days later, they returned to the farmhouse. The nursery smelled faintly of lavender and fresh paint. A mobile of soft felt stars turned slowly above the crib. Claire placed Ella down gently, watching her tiny hands flutter in the air like they were still learning what it meant to exist. Caleb lingered in the doorway. "You okay?" he asked. Claire turned, nodding slowly. "Tired, but full." He stepped inside, hesitant. "Do you want me to stay, or should I come back later?" She looked at him, really looked, at the man who had asked for nothing, but given so much. "I want you to stay," she said, "but not because I need help, because I want you to be part of this." He stepped forward, kissed her forehead, then bent down and gently stroked Ella's cheek with his finger. She's perfect, he whispered. She's loud, Claire said, laughing softly. She gets it from you. The weeks that followed were a blur of soft cries, warm bottles, midnight rocking, and moments of such quiet beauty Claire could barely hold them all. There were times she doubted herself when Ella wouldn't sleep, when the crying wouldn't stop, when the weight of responsibility pressed against her chest in the dark. But then Caleb would walk in with a cup of tea, or wrap his arms around her from behind and simply say, "You're doing good, Mama." And somehow, those words stitched her back together. One evening, Claire found herself standing at the edge of the orchard, Ella wrapped snug in a sling against her chest. The apple trees had bloomed. White blossoms swayed in the golden light of sunset, petals drifting down like blessings. Claire rocked gently from side to side, her fingers brushing Ella's back. "I used to think love was loud," she whispered. "Dramatic, big gestures. But this is love too, maybe even more." Behind her, footsteps approached. "Caleb, I thought you might be out here," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She likes the orchard," Claire murmured. "She likes the sound of your voice." They stood there in silence, a family not defined by tradition, but by choice. Later that night, Claire sat in the nursery with a journal open on her lap. Ella slept in the crib beside her, fingers curled like commas. She began to write, "Dear Ella, you were born into quiet. Not the kind that's empty, but the kind that holds peace. You were not the product of a perfect love story, but you are the beginning of something real, and that's even better. I once thought being strong meant doing it all alone, but I've learned that true strength is knowing when to let someone walk beside you. Caleb loves us, not with grand speeches or promises carved in stone, but with firewood stacked before the snow, and tea made when I forget to eat, and lullabies hummed off-key in the kitchen. One day, I'll tell you the whole story of how I was left, how I chose to begin again, how I almost said no to love because I was still afraid, and how you made me brave enough to say yes to life, to myself, to the kind of love that stays." She closed the journal, kissed Ella's forehead, and turned off the light. Weeks turned into months. Ella grew stronger. Claire grew softer. Caleb never left. They never threw a big wedding. There was no ring on her finger, not yet. But there were pancakes every Sunday. There were sleepy kisses at dawn. There were 3 chairs at the kitchen table, and always room for more. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Claire leaned against the porch railing, watching Caleb carry Ella across the yard on his shoulders. She laughed as Ella squealed with joy, hands reaching for the low branches of the apple trees. And in that moment, Claire understood something deep and final. She was home, not because of a house, not because of a man, but because she had built something honest with pain, with hope, and with wide open hands. She had chosen it, and it had chosen her right back. Have you ever been so deeply betrayed that it changed your definition of love? Not just heartbreak, but the kind of abandonment that makes you question your own worth. Even as you carry new life inside you, Claire Whitmore was left at the altar. No warning, no explanation. Just a text, "I can't do this." And to make it worse, she was already pregnant with his child. Alone in a town that wasn't hers, carrying a baby she now had to raise alone. Claire faced a question many women silently carry. Do I protect my heart at all costs or risk it again for something real? Then came Caleb, a quiet man with his own wounds, who didn't offer promises, only presence. But when her ex suddenly returned, demanding to be part of the child's life, Claire had to make the hardest decision of all. Do you let the past claim your future, or do you finally choose yourself first, if it were you? What would you do? This isn't just a love story. It's a story about rebuilding, about stillness, about what happens when you let go of the life you planned, for the life that was meant to be. If this touched something in you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. There are moments in life that break us not loudly, but quietly. A betrayal, a loss, a silence that lingers longer than it should. But as Claire's story reminds us, being broken doesn't mean being defeated. Sometimes, it's in those quiet ruins that something more honest begins. We learn that love is not always about grand gestures or perfect timing. True love, whether romantic, familial, or self-love, shows up quietly, consistently, and without condition. More importantly, we see that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's sacred. Because when you honor your own worth, you teach others how to treat you. And when you allow healing, you make space for something better than you imagined. For those of us who have lived through heartbreak, disappointment, or deep change, this story is a gentle reminder. It's never too late to start again. Not from the outside, but from within. Let your next chapter be written not by fear, but by quiet courage. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If it touched your heart, even just a little, we hope it reminded you that healing, love, and new beginnings are always possible. If you found meaning here, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that speak to the soul. Until next time, take care of your heart and never stop believing in second chances.